Mark Halden slammed Darius Cole's collar against the brick wall, his breath reeking of cigarettes and gasoline blasting into Darius's face, voice grinding like teeth trash, like you driving that pile of scrap into this town. You're just a roadblock, got it. Darius didn't blink, the corner of his mouth curling like a blade. Careful. Today's trash might be the evidence that throws you out of your seat of power. Mark shoved harder, his eyes bloodshot. I'll crush you before you even open your mouth. Darius tilted his head, whispering just loud enough for Mark to catch every word. Wrong. I will open my mouth, and the whole country will swallow every word. Late in the afternoon, sunlight slanted like fire, pouring down the dark red brick wall of the gas station at the edge of town. Fumes of gasoline rose in thick waves, mixing with the scent of hot rubber from the tires that had just come to a stop, creating the sweltering haze over the oil-stained concrete lot. The place was usually quiet, with only the dry wind rustling through a row of old road signs and the steady clicking of the gas pump feeding into a tank when the deep, rough growl of a truck engine shattered the silence. Darius Cole pushed open the cab door and stepped down, his movements firm but unhurried boots thud on the cement with a low, dry sound. His green jacket, loose enough to cover his solid shoulders, shifted slightly as he walked, revealing a dark black t-shirt underneath with a low collar that exposed sun-browned skin. In his hand was a fresh fuel receipt, the paper edges curling slightly from the humidity in the air. Darius's eyes swept across the pump area, past the large silver cylindrical tanks, reflecting sunlight like a dull mirror toward the payment counter, where an employee in a red uniform was hunched over, entering numbers into an old computer. From more than 20 meters behind, down the entrance road to the station, another engine sound emerged, steady and dry like the ticking of a clock that never lagged. A beige patrol SUV bearing the provincial police insignia suddenly turned in its tires, crunching across the gravel before stopping right at the entrance. A thin veil of dust rose from under the vehicle, hung in the sunlight, then slowly dispersed, revealing each letter printed sharply on the door. The driver's side door snapped open and Mark Halden stepped out. He was tall and lean with broad shoulders, his close-cropped hair glinting in the sun like sweaty fur. Mark's blue eyes were so cold the light seemed to pause when it hit them, and from the moment his boot touched the ground, that gaze locked onto Darius like a predator marking its target. Mark's left hand rose slightly to adjust the police belt where the handcuffs and radio swayed with his steps. At the same time, from the passenger seat, Luke Madsen opened the door but didn't fully step out. He stayed by the vehicle, leaning casually against the frame, arms crossed, his expression detached but focused on the narrowing gap between Mark and Darius. Mark started moving, long fast strides, the sound of his hard soles hitting the cement sharp and dry, echoing in urgent rhythms through the still air. His shadow, stretched and twisted by the evening sun, cut diagonally across the concrete, intersecting Darius's path like an invisible warning line. Every step Mark took carried a sense of weight and inevitability, as if he were closing in on the end of a pursuit that had already been written. When only a few steps remained, Mark spoke, his voice raised just enough to drown out the hum of the pump and the distant traffic on the main road. Stop. I have a few questions. On the last word, his tone dipped a level lower, shedding any trace of a regular inquiry, and shifted entirely into the force of a command. The words landed like a steel lock slamming shut, leaving no crack for refusal. Darius stopped in a spot where the smell of gasoline from a nearby pump hit him straight in the nose, blending with the faint burnt scent from a metal sign heated above the canopy. His shadow stood right next to a slick of oil, shimmering in multiple colors under the slanted sunlight, half his body wrapped in light, the other half swallowed by the shade of the gas station roof. He turned halfway just enough to face Mark, the motion slow and deliberate, as if he were in full control of the moment. Darius's face came into full view under the light, dark-toned and sharp-featured, but instead of of panic or confusion, it held the calm and steadiness of someone long accustomed to being watched with suspicion. His eyes passed over the man approaching, not dodging, not yielding, revealing nothing close to submission. Mark took another step forward, closing the space to no more than the span of two outstretched arms. His shadow stretched across Darius's chest, and rather than leaning away, Darius tilted his head slightly forward so their eyes met level. They stood so close that Mark's breath, carrying the stench of cigarettes and gasoline clinging to his uniform collar, blew straight into Darius's face. A moment of silence dragged out longer than it should have filled, only by the faint rustle of fabric brushing against the wall and the soft clink of metal signs tapping in the breeze. Mark tilted his head slightly, his gaze dropping, and spoke again, slower but heavier. "Stop. I have a few questions." Darius didn't answer right away. His eyes flicked past Mark's shoulder, spotting Luke still motionless like a shadow watching every movement. Then he turned back to Mark, looked him straight in the eye, lips curling into a faint indifferent arc, and his voice dropped low, each word sharp and clear enough to leave nothing behind. "You ask, but remember, you answer first." The words landed like stones, hitting still water, each one sending ripples no one could predict. Their eyes clashed, one ice cold, the other blade sharp, and the air between them thickened, drawn so tight it felt like you could hear a heartbeat if the world went quiet enough. Mark froze for less than half a second, then narrowed his eyes, his lips pressing into a thin line like a steel wire pulled taut. His right hand, resting loosely by his side, began to curl inward, knuckles turning pale under the pressure, a clear signal of a collar grab about to come. In that space, the late sun still blazed gold from above, but the heat radiating now didn't come from the sky. It came from the clash just starting to spark between two men who had never learned how to stand beneath anyone else. The gas pump kept ticking with its dry, steady clicks, like time quietly counting down in a moment stretched so tight it could rip the air apart. A wave of hot wind swept in from the highway carrying dry dust that swirled around the storage tanks before curling between the two men facing each other. The late sunlight slanted down, lighting up every dust mote floating between them, making everything seem to slow, drawn out to the point of suffocation. Mark Halden, his blue eyes glinting with a coldness hard to read, took one more step, the soles of his boots scraping softly against the cement. His hand snapped up like a hunting bird's strike, seizing the green collar of Darius Cole. The fabric stretched tight, its creases pulling flat to reveal the black t-shirt beneath, and with full force Mark shoved, slamming Darius straight back against the brick wall. The impact sounded dry and sharp, merging with the hiss of fabric under strain, forming a heavy noise that didn't need words to be understood as a warning. The shove didn't throw Darius off balance, but his back pressed flush against the wall, each groove of the bricks digging into his shoulders and shoulder blades. Heat radiated from the wall, baked by sunlight all day, now rebounding with a stifling burn that clung to his skin. The wind passed again, bringing the thick scent of gasoline and a trace of exhaust left behind by vehicles that had just departed. Just a few steps away, Luke Madsen remained beside the patrol SUV. His arms were tightly folded across his chest, gray eyes still and cold, like a frozen lake watching every move between Mark and Darius without a single sign of stepping in. Luke's silence became a second wall sealing off any escape from the invisible pressure closing in. Mark's grip tightened slightly, pulling the collar up and exposing the line of Darius's collarbone under the harsh yellow light. Veins bulged in Mark's neck, visible through his sun-worn skin, his breath heavier now, laced with stale cigarettes and sweat. His voice dropped heavy like a stone rolling downhill. "Are you looking to make this harder on yourself?" It wasn't just a threat, it was a test, a push to see how far the man in front of him could be bent. Mark's gaze never wavered from Darius, as if trying to crush each expression, every twitch, looking for any crack of fear to rise to the surface. Darius stayed still, tilting his head slightly back to keep Mark's shadow from blocking his view. His dark eyes seemed to see through the shell of the man holding him. There was no panic in that stare. Instead, it was so steady it could be mistaken for defiance. A single bead of sweat slid down from his temple along the sharp line of his jaw, catching the light like a sliver of metal. His voice came low and even, each word landing like nails into concrete. Only hard if you forget you're being watched. The final word dragged just slightly like a needle, twisting in the ear, leaving an echo that thickened the air across the entire lot. Darius's reply caused a twitch at the corner of Mark's mouth, unclear whether from irritation or an effort to suppress another reaction. His eyes narrowed, lashes casting a shadow that made them seem even darker, though they still gleamed with a cold light. His hand remained fixed on Darius's collar, but his thumb shifted slightly, pulling more fabric and tightening the grip, forcing the man in front of him to feel the full weight of the power pressing down. The next gust of wind carried more dust, sweeping across the lot and hitting them head-on, the fine particles clinging to the edge of the green jacket and the beige collar of the police uniform. In the distance, a truck horn echoed from the highway, dragging with it a sense of vastness and emptiness, underscoring the isolation of this moment. Luke still said nothing, but his gaze flicked toward the road where a middle-aged man was stepping out of the convenience store with a paper bag in hand. The man glanced toward Mark and Darius, hesitated briefly, then quickly turned and walked faster to his car, a quiet but calculated action like a reminder to himself to steer clear of trouble. The indifference of the outside world only thickened the tension between the two main figures like a cord being twisted tighter, waiting for the snap. Mark's breathing stayed steady but grew deeper, and from where he stood, Darius could feel every rise and fall of the man's chest as he spoke again, voice lower and rougher. "Around here, I decide who's in trouble." Darius didn't move, still leaning against the wall, eyes locked on Mark, that gaze reflecting everything the man in uniform was putting on display, the confidence of someone used to dominance, the arrogance of authority in uniform. A short silence followed, just long enough for the ticking of the gas pump to rise again and for the dust to keep dancing in the narrow shaft of light between them. Darius tilted his chin up slightly, the space between their faces now less than the span of a hand. His voice was low and soft, but each word carved out like it was etched into the brick behind him. Only hard if you forget you're being watched. The repetition wasn't from lack of words. It was how he framed the warning at the exact moment the other man had no choice but to hear it. Mark pressed his lips together, a muscle twitching in his jaw, his eyes shifting slightly to the side as if to hide a brief moment of hesitation. But his hand still didn't release. The pressure remained, leaving deep creases in the green fabric of Darius's jacket. Another gust swirled past this time, carrying the creaking sound of a roadside sign. The noise stretched out, slowed, then faded, leaving only the breathing of two men and the steady clicking of the gas pump. The space around them seemed to contract, every motion now revolving around the tension between Mark Halden and Darius Cole, where one man believed he was in control and the other knew better than anyone that the game was just beginning. The evening shadows had stretched to their limit, dark bands cast by the massive truck and the patrol SUV overlapping on the oil-stained concrete. The crossing of their shadows resembled two underground currents meeting, swirling into a dense patch of darkness, right where Mark Halden and Darius Cole still stood, locked in place, their breathing heavy. The space around them felt frozen, pierced only by distant sounds, the horn of a freight train echoing from the port, the grind of tires on asphalt somewhere along the highway, and the steady ticking of the gas pump marking time, like a metronome, counting down the final moves of a chess mat. Mark stared at Darius for a long moment, then his voice came not loud, but heavy enough to weigh down the space between them. "ID. Now." The sentence was short-clipped, packed with with command and the instinct of authority ingrained through habit. The way he pronounced now came down like a blade slicing off any delay or questioning. His eyes didn't blink, brows drawn and jaw tight with each breath. Darius stayed where he was, leaning against the wall, his gaze never leaving Mark's face. He let the silence hang just long enough for the command to float in the air unanswered, then spoke, his voice low and steady. "What's the legal basis?" Each word was released slowly enough that the listener had to absorb every syllable with no room to skip and no room to dodge the fact that the question demanded an answer. Between them, the air thickened and surrounding sounds fell away, leaving only the rhythm of their own heartbeats echoing in their ears. Mark tilted his head slightly, his blue eyes narrowing under the last light of day. He didn't answer. Instead, he suddenly drove the weight of his upper body forward, slamming Darius's shoulder hard into the brick wall. The thud rang out, dry and sharp, bouncing across the empty lot. The force of the shove sent fine brick dust drifting down, settling onto the shoulder of Darius's green jacket. The air was filled with the mix of warm brick and damp grit, forming a musty scent that clung to every breath. Darius didn't shift to absorb the blow, nor did he duck to ease the pressure. He kept his spine straight as if the wall behind him was a brace holding him firm against the pressure in front. In that instant, his lips curled into a faint smile, void of friendliness. It was a smirk, cold and sharp, like a blade slicing through the polished surface of his opponent's power. His eyes narrowed slightly, and his voice rose, each word carrying its own weight. "You planning to make the law bow to?" The words landed without needing to be raised or backed by any gesture yet. They echoed like a hand slammed flat against a conference table in a quiet room. A flicker passed through Mark's eyes, something hard to define. Maybe irritation, or maybe a slow realization that he'd just been pulled into a game where the other man held the next move. Beside the patrol SUV, Luke Madsen remained in the same folded arms stance, but his gray eyes shifted from a distant stare to fully lock onto the standoff. He looked from Mark to Darius, as if calculating just how far this might escalate. A fresh gust from the north blew in, carrying the salty scent of the sea and the damp breath of nearby marshland, but it wasn't enough to cool the heat rising in the space between the two men. Mark kept his hand on Darius's shoulder for a few more seconds, then let go only to immediately reposition and press it flat across Darius's chest, forming a kind of warning barrier. His gaze dropped, voice still low but sharper now. "I don't need a reason to ask for ID from a stranger wandering around here." Each word pushed through clenched teeth, part declaration, part challenge. Darius stayed calm. He tilted his head slightly to the left as if to see Mark from another angle, his eyes steady and unshaken. In his mind, the pieces of this encounter were stacking up into a clear picture of how Mark operated, how he wielded power, and believed no one could call him out on his own turf. But Darius knew better, and that knowledge deepened the smirk at the corner of his mouth. At the edge of the road, a small truck rumbled by, the engine's growl shaking the gas station sign slightly. The driver glanced their way, his eyes flickering with hesitation, but the vehicle rolled on, leaving behind a thin trail of dust that drifted across the lot. That dust passed over Darius and Mark, breaking the last light of day into tiny floating fragments, scattering across both faces, locked in confrontation. Mark leaned in the space between them now, down to half a hand's width. "I'll ask one last time," he said, lowering his voice even further. "ID." His breath hit Darius full in the face, laced with cigarette smoke and old coffee. Darius didn't flinch, kept his gaze steady, and even raised his chin slightly, as if to meet the stare more directly. The smile didn't fade. His voice came again, calm, but drilling deep with every word. "You planning to make the law bow to?" Another silence stretched out, and this time the sound of the gas pump seemed louder, as if counting the tension between them beat by beat. From the direction of the convenience store, the glass door swung open, and a woman stepped out holding a baby. She glanced toward Mark and Darius, her gaze slowing slightly as she registered the confrontation, then quickly looked down to soothe the child and hurried towards her car. Everyone who saw the scene shared the same instinct: keep their distance and say nothing, as if standing at the edge of a fire no one wanted to be the second spark for. The next gust of wind carried dry leaves spinning around their feet, and as it passed, Mark's eyes remained locked on Darius, while Darius stood still, as if the entire world around them was nothing but a backdrop for this standoff. Neither gave an inch, and both understood clearly that from this moment on the situation had moved far beyond a routine ID check. This was no longer a request. It had become a battle of nerve power and endurance, where every word, every move was a razor-edged blade slicing into the already narrow space between them. The red and green neon lights of the convenience store next to the gas station blinked unevenly, their jerky rhythm casting flickering flashes, sometimes drifting quietly, sometimes flaring cold and sharp, then fading out like they were testing the eyes of anyone watching. On the concrete in front of the store, a puddle mixed with oil spread into iridescent rings, reflecting a warped image of the signage and neon glow, turning the ground into a distorted mirror. The smell of gasoline and oil mixed with the damp heat rising off concrete that had baked all day, blending with the faint scent of fast food drifting from the store, creating a thick, stifling layer in the air. The shadows of Darius Cole and Mark Halden stretched long across the ground, their outlines fused as if frozen inside a moment wound tight with no way out. Mark tilted his head slightly, his blue eyes scanning Darius's face from top to bottom, stopping at the broad shoulders beneath the green jacket. He spoke, his voice dropping a tone, adding a slight press at the end of the sentence. "You don't look like you're from around here." The comment didn't come as a question, but as a pre-written conclusion wrapped in a polished layer of contempt. Beneath the flickering neon and the steady rhythm of the gas pump, Mark's words cut through like a bold stroke across a page already blurred with erasures. Darius didn't move, his eyes slowly shifting toward Mark, not rushed, not indifferent. He tilted his chin slightly, a faint smile brushing past his lips. Not enough to count as an expression, but enough to signal that the words had landed, had been measured, and would be returned. His voice came out steady, each word as crisp as a steel nib scraping paper. "So what do people from around here look like?" The question carried no curiosity, only a sharp hook tossed back, forcing Mark to either draw out the mold he believed in or admit he'd stepped into the dangerous ground of prejudice. Mark's mouth twitched, but not into a smile. It was an expression half mocking, half held in check, a reflex from someone used to dominating, but now being pulled into a position where he had to defend what he said. He shifted slightly, hands still ready to tighten, eyes locked on Darius's face, as if trying to read the next move. Behind Mark, a few people stepped out of the convenience store. A young couple carrying food bags laughed as they walked, but when they passed by, they cast a quick glance toward Mark and Darius, their eyes brushing the tension between the two. The smiles vanished, their steps quickened, and their eyes darted away as if afraid one extra second might drag them into the storm forming right in front of them. An older man at the next pump quietly turned away, adjusting his baseball cap and focusing on the nozzle in his hand, pretending not to hear, not to see, though his fingers clenched the handle tight enough to pale the knuckles. The silence from the bystanders compressed the air around Mark and Darius even further. Darius kept his eyes on Mark, his voice lowering just enough to keep the words contained within the space between them, yet clear enough that each one cut directly into that space. "Am I being judged for my skin color, or because you refuse to look closely?" It wasn't a shout, but the weight behind the words turned the question into a direct blow, exposing the undertone of the earlier remark and cornering Mark into either denying it or being revealed. The neon light kept blinking, reflecting off Mark's blue eyes as flickering glints, impossible to tell if they showed anger or calculation. His jaw tensed at neck veins visible beneath the stretched skin. The hand gripping Darius's collar gave a small twitch, then held as if restraining an impulse. A light breeze drifted in from the nearby street, bringing with it the sound of rustling newspaper and the smell of baked goods from somewhere down the block, but those sensations were quickly swallowed by the intense focus between the two men facing each other. Luke Madsen stayed by the patrol SUV, his cold gray eyes still fixed on the confrontation, but something faintly resembling concern began to show on his face. It wasn't worry for Darius. It was the unease of seeing Mark, who usually operated under strict control, let an emotion slip through. Luke knew Mark well enough to recognize that he was trained to avoid saying things that could be easily misinterpreted, but in this moment, every sign pointed to the fact that his composure was wearing thin, and for someone in uniform that was more dangerous than any physical move. Across the lot in front of the gas station, the air grew so heavy that even the most ordinary sounds felt intrusive. A distant car horn reached them, muffled by the thick layers of tension. Their shadows stretched across the oil-slicked puddle, quivering with every subtle movement, and on the surface of the water, the neon light kept bending their reflections, turning the whole scene into something like a slow-motion reel where every second dragged out longer than it should. Mark kept his eyes locked on Darius, and Darius didn't move his gaze, holding firm, not defensive, but more like a challenge, a statement that he wouldn't lower his stare just to avoid the pressure. The question still hovered between them unanswered, but it had already done its work, cutting a deep crack into the wall of authority Mark had been trying to build, and making everyone around them, whether intentionally or not, begin to realize that this wasn't just a random stop-and-question encounter. The growl of a motorcycle's exhaust tore through the dense air, the sound echoing from the street outside before quickly dissipating, leaving a heavy silence at the gas station. The hot wind it stirred swept through the space between Darius Cole and Mark Halden, gently lifting the edge of Darius's green jacket and making the badge on Mark's police uniform glint with a sharp flash. Their shadows still stretched long on the concrete, merging into a single mass as Mark moved closer, his hand gripping Darius's collar, eyes never leaving his steady gaze. Darius lowered his voice just loud enough to cut through the brief gap, but clear enough that each word seemed to slice through the charged air. "Are you sure you want to continue?" As the words landed, Mark's gaze momentarily softened, part surprise at how Darius had flipped the pressure with his voice, part something undefinable in the question that made him feel unsettled. He blinked quickly, as if to erase the flicker of uncertainty. Then, as if denying his own hesitation, Mark tightened his grip on Darius's collar, his fingers pressing into the thick fabric, pushing Darius's neck and shoulder harder against the sun-heated brick wall. The sound of the fabric straining was sharp, mixing with Mark's increasingly rapid breath. Darius felt the pressure each muscle in Mark's hand forcing the collar tighter, but his face remained unchanged. Only his eyes narrowed slightly, as if calculating the remaining distance before making a move that would force his opponent to back off. His right hand slowly and deliberately slid inside the green jacket. The movement was so slow that an observer from a distance could count the beats, but it was that very slowness that thickened the air around them. Mark's eyes immediately shifted to track the motion, his brows furrowing as his grip tightened further, an instinctive reaction from someone unwilling to let his opponent do anything without permission. From his position next to the patrol car, Luke Madsen watched the scene unfold like a slow-motion film. He saw that Darius wasn't resisting, wasn't striking back, but every movement carried an invisible weight that made it impossible for him to look away. Luke felt his heartbeat quicken, not out of concern for Mark, but because he was starting to doubt whether the entire situation was going the way Mark had thought it would. Darius's hand finally stopped at his chest, fingers slipping beneath the black t-shirt, pulling out a small flat object. The neon light from the convenience store reflected off the smooth black leather of a wallet, making it stand out against the shadows and the yellow light spilling from the gas station's canopy. Darius turned his wrist slightly, opening the wallet just enough for the metallic glint of a badge to flash in the mixed light. It wasn't the gleam of ordinary metal, but the cold shine of official power, the kind any cop would recognize instantly. Mark's gaze hardened, but this time it was from realization. His grip still hadn't loosened, but his breath caught for a brief moment. Darius didn't let the silence swallow this moment. He held the wallet just within Mark's line of sight, his voice even and low, neither high nor low, but carrying the weight of a stone dropped into water already rippling. "You're arresting the wrong person while investigating the right place." For a few seconds, all sound seemed to drain out of the lot. The gas pump continued its rhythmic ticking, but it was pushed to the periphery of the witness's awareness. Mark stood motionless, his hand still gripping Darius's collar, but the pressure had lost its initial certainty. His blue eyes no longer carried the cold, commanding gaze, but instead showed a mix of recognition and instinctual self-defense. Darius maintained his stance, letting the light from the FBI badge shine straight into Mark's eyes, not rushing to withdraw or say another word. From his position, Luke had clearly seen the engraving on the badge. His heart skipped a beat, and then he slightly turned his head away, avoiding Mark's gaze. Thoughts tangled in his mind. If Mark had known this was the FBI from the start, things would have been different, but now there was no easy way out. The pedestrian who had exited the convenience store earlier paused by his car, hand frozen on the door handle as if trying to process what had just happened. The distance between the two men remained, but the balance of power had shifted. Mark knew it, and Darius was more certain of it than anyone. The motorcycle's roar had faded from the background, replaced by a stillness, broken only by the wind carrying the smell of gasoline, hot metal, and a slight trace of damp newsprint from someone's forgotten bundle outside the store. These seemingly small details were layered into the scene of confrontation where one side had been forced to see its limits and the other stood firm without yielding. Mark still hadn't spoken, but his expression had changed, no longer that of someone certain they were winning, but rather someone weighing their next move where every choice might turn out to be a mistake. Darius, with his faint smiles still not quite faded, slowly closed the wallet, the motion not quick but decisive, then let it disappear back inside his jacket, as if the brief reveal had been a clean cut, deep enough not to need repetition. The silence that followed stretched on like a taut rope, waiting to see who would snap first. The neon lights continued to flicker, casting shifting patches of light and shadow on the oil-stained concrete. The wind blew through again, carrying the scent of a storm yet to come, and in the eyes of both men, one had already realized that this game would no longer be the same as it had started. Across the street, right by the entrance to a used auto parts store, a young man in his 20s leaned against the metal frame of a signboard next to a weathered BMX bike. The brim of his black cap was pulled low, covering most of his eyes, leaving only his nose and chin speckled with dust. He had been standing there for a few minutes initially, just taking a break from his bike ride home from school, but his gaze had inadvertently drifted to the gas station across the street inside. In his line of sight were two figures standing on the concrete, one in a green jacket, the other in a beige police uniform, standing close together in a stance that anyone could tell was one of conflict. The late-day sunlight fell, casting two long shadows that intertwined, pulling tight as if fused together. The area around this part of the street wasn't crowded in the late afternoon, but there were still sporadic sounds, the distant rumble of a truck, the sound of tires grinding on asphalt as another SUV passed by, the metallic click of a garage door closing at the end of the street. Everything seemed normal, but the air around the gas station felt unnaturally thick. The young man could feel his heartbeat quickening as he realized the police officer had a firm grip on the other man's collar and had only tightened when he saw the man's hand slowly slide into his jacket. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his fingers trembling slightly as he opened the camera app, both out of excitement and an instinctive feeling that this moment wouldn't repeat. The lens wobbled slightly as he raised the phone, trying to keep the frame wide enough to capture both figures. His eyes focused on the hand of the man in the green jacket, and his heart skipped a beat when he saw him pull out a black leather wallet. Neon light from the convenience store next door reflected off the leather surface, but what made him hold his breath was when the edge of the wallet opened, revealing a shiny metal badge. He quickly zoomed in, focusing the shot, and in the frame, the intricately engraved symbol became clear, shining under the evening's golden light mixed with artificial light. It was the FBI badge, and in that moment he felt like he had just witnessed a scene from a movie, but it was happening right in front of him. A whisper escaped his throat, almost automatically loud enough for him to hear, "Oh my God, it's the FBI." He took a small step back, leaning against the metal signboard to steady himself, his eyes glued to the screen. His thumb quickly slid to hit the save button for the clip. He knew it was just a few seconds, but those seconds could make a huge impact. Without hesitation, he closed the camera, opened his messaging app, and selected a group chat with his 4 close friends who often shared street videos. His fingers typed quickly. "Check this out. Right at the gas station on the corner of Pine and 4th. At the same time, he attached the video and pressed send. The notification sound for the message came almost immediately, causing him to flinch slightly. A round-eyed, shocked emoji appeared first, followed by a message from his daredevil friend in the group chat. "Post it now. Let's see who's afraid of whom." His eyes stayed glued to the screen as he read, but the corner of his mouth lifted into a brief smile. His group had always hunted down strange street moments, but nothing like this had ever been this explosive. He looked across the street again. Mark Halden was still standing close to Darius Cole, his hand gripping the collar, but from this angle he noticed that the tension had shifted. Darius stood firm, his gaze calm yet deep, and he could clearly feel that the balance had shifted. The wind from the highway blew through, carrying a few crumpled pieces of newspaper across the road, one of which drifted onto the gas station lot, swirling around Mark's shoe before the wind carried it away again. His phone vibrated in his hand this time, a call from another member of the chat. The screen read, "What the hell did you just film?" He immediately silenced the ringer, not wanting to miss any developments from across the street. His heart was still racing, palms slightly sweaty, making him switch hands on the phone to prevent it from slipping. In his mind, countless scenarios ran through. If this video went up, how many people would see it, what the reactions would be, and what would happen to the 2 men in the frame. A sedan passed by, its headlights flicking on early and sweeping quickly across his face, causing him to squint. When the light faded, his vision cleared and he saw Darius slowly lower his hand. The wallet now gone back into his jacket, but the mark of the moment still hung in the air. Mark didn't move, but his body seemed to be in a state of hesitation, something he had never seen from a cop during these street standoffs. He swallowed, realizing that the video he had just captured wasn't just a clip of a tense encounter, but living proof of a moment when power had shifted. He took a deep breath, pulled the brim of his cap lower, pressed his back more firmly against the signpost, and continued to watch, knowing that this wasn't over, and his role had now shifted from mere observer to something far more involved. In the small apartment on the 3rd floor of an old building in the heart of town, the light from the phone screen was the brightest source of light in the room. The room was just over 20 square meters, with beige walls, yellowed by time, and a slow-turning ceiling fan casting faint shadows on the ceiling. In the corner of the room, a young woman sat with her legs crossed on an old green fabric sofa, her hair hastily tied into a bun, a few stray locks falling to touch her cheek. In front of her was a low wooden table scattered with magazines, a steaming cup of tea, and a phone glowing with the screen on. The first sound through her headphones was the wind and the distant hum of an engine, followed by a slight shake in the image, capturing the moment when the 2 men stood facing each other in the gas station lot. The late day light in the video cast everything in a dense yellow hue, yet it couldn't conceal the flash of the FBI badge as Darius Cole opened his wallet. The girl tilted her head slightly, her gaze focused to the point that she almost didn't blink. That moment made her heart race, as if she had accidentally seen a secret no one here wanted revealed. Her instincts told her that this video contained more than it appeared. She used 2 fingers to rewind slowly, pulling back a few seconds, then stopped at the exact frame where the metallic badge gleamed under the flickering neon lights. Each time that image appeared, a feeling of both excitement and tension surged. Leaning deeper into the chair, she took a long breath, as if wanting to savor the moment. then opened her social media app. The status entry box popped up, the cursor blinking, waiting for text. The first few characters appeared quickly on the screen. "If this is the FBI, this will blow up. No edits, no hesitation." She attached the video she had just received to the post, set it to public, and hit send. The motion took just a few seconds, but inside she felt an odd, impatient anticipation, like tossing a stone into a still pond and waiting to see how far the ripples would spread. She set the phone down on the table, stood up, and walked toward the kitchen. The small kitchen was separated by a fabric curtain where an electric kettle was humming. She poured water into the teacup, the steam rising and fogging her glasses, resting on the bridge of her nose. When she returned to her chair, not even 5 minutes had passed, but the phone screen was already brightly lit with dozens of new notifications. She glanced down and saw the view count had surpassed 1,000, though she hadn't yet read a single comment. The wind outside howled through the window crack, blending with the steady hum of the ceiling fan, but all sounds were pushed aside as her eyes followed the continuously climbing number. 10 minutes and the view count hit 5,000. 20 minutes and it doubled, along with hundreds of shares. Emojis appeared without stop, angry faces, astonished faces, hearts mixed with comments full of anger or sarcasm, all attached to the video. Her hand grew warmer from holding the phone too long, but she didn't let go. It felt like sitting at the center of a noisy room where hundreds of voices rose together, all centered around a moment that lasted less than a few seconds in the video. By the 30th minute, just as she was about to stand up to pull the curtains, the number hit 50,000. Each time she scrolled down the comment section and grew longer, filled with uncompromising words. One person wrote, "This is why people need to record everything." Another, "If he's FBI, this is going to be huge." There were even comments analyzing each frame, zooming in on the badge, circling it, comparing it to official models. The more she read, the more she felt a wave rising, and her post was at the center of it. At the top of the list was a comment with thousands of likes. "First time seeing a cop dig his own grave." The short phrase, both sarcastic and sharp, seemed to sum up the emotions of the tens of thousands who had watched the video. She lingered on that comment longer than the others, as if hearing someone speak it directly into her ear. Outside, the sound of a bus horn echoed in the distance, and streetlight beams filtered through the window, casting yellow stripes on the wall. In the small room, she sat still, her eyes still fixed on the phone screen, acutely aware of the shift in the atmosphere since the video began spreading. Amid the constant stream of notifications and incoming comments, she knew the story at the gas station was no longer just a local incident. It had crossed beyond local boundaries, and within a few hours it would likely be all over news outlets and large forums, forcing everyone to take notice. She gently tapped her fingers on the edge of the phone, her gaze never leaving the rapidly climbing numbers. In her mind, one question kept repeating. Did Mark Halden, the cop in the video, realize that once the FBI badge flashed, everything had already slipped beyond his control? Then she leaned forward slightly, took a sip of the now cold tea, letting the steady hum of the ceiling fan mix with the continuous notifications chiming in, signaling a wave that no one in the video could stop. The girl's phone screen blazed brightly with new notifications popping up in an endless stream. The share and comment icons appeared in dense columns requiring constant scrolling to keep up, and each time her finger touched the screen, a new flood of information poured down. The tiny red symbols showing the number of comments and shares jumped up as if someone was stuffing them in by the handful. The vibration alert kept buzzing, merging with the sound of wind blowing through the window crack, making the cramped room feel as if it were vibrating to a rhythm far different from the quiet of the town's evening. She scrolled down and within seconds realized that the video she posted had far exceeded the circle of friends or the small local community. Clips cut from the original video were now everywhere. People had selected the moment when Darius Cole looked straight into Mark Halden's eyes, his voice slow and deep, asking, "Are you sure you want to continue a line now?" highlighted as a surprise, cropped, enlarged, and captioned in bold white text at the bottom of the frame. "You sure you want to do this?" Some accounts added shaky visual effects, making Darius's gaze in the clip appear as sharp as a knife, flickering briefly before freezing at the moment when Mark hesitated. Others added tense background music or replaced it with pounding drums just before the FBI badge flashed. These meme versions spread like wildfire yacht in a strong wind. Each edit came with hundreds of different captions, from sarcastic ones like "when your boss asks you to work overtime" to more angry ones targeting local law enforcement. In less than an hour, two hashtags, #GasStationFBI and #BigMistake, surged to the top of the national trends. The first time she clicked on one of these hashtags, the number of related posts had already reached tens of thousands, and each time she returned, the list grew by hundreds of new posts. Not only regular viewers, but accounts with large followings, including investigative journalists and independent reporters, also began sharing the clip. A well-known journalist in the negative exposure field posted with the status, "If this is real, this will be one of the quickest self-exposures I've ever seen." On the opposite side, some accounts tried to defend Mark, arguing that this is just one part of the story. But these responses were quickly drowned out by waves of opposition comments and thousands of other examples from the online community drawing comparisons to similar past incidents. Amidst the flood of information, an anonymous tweet suddenly became the focal point. This account had no profile picture, few previous posts, but tagged the official @FBI8Q along with the 10-second clip of the moment the badge appeared. The content was brief. "This yours?" But its impact erupted immediately. Within 15 minutes, the post was shared tens of thousands of times, followed by a wave of comments demanding an official response from the federal agency. What was already a hot topic was now further fueled by the public call-out of the highest authorities. The girl sat still in front of the screen, her fingers slowing as she scrolled down. Among the thousands of opinions, one comment stood out, capturing her attention longer than the rest. It was simple, not elaborate, but it hit straight to the heart of the issue. There's a camera, there's the law, there's justice, and they still did this. The more than 1,000 likes below it were proof of the weight of the words. The comment didn't need to be shouted, nor did it need sarcasm, but it made the reader feel as if they were being directly called out, reminding them that evidence law and the concept of justice only held value if people respected them. Outside the window frame, the town had been swallowed up by streetlight. The wet street, after a brief rain, reflected the lights, stretching them into long winding streaks. The occasional sound of a motorcycle echoed, then disappeared around the corner. But in the small apartment, all those sounds seemed drowned out by the flow of data surging from the phone. Each time she swiped the screen, it felt like stepping into a vast square, where tens of thousands were shouting at once, but instead of screams, there were words and images scrolling down the screen. She leaned back, relaxed her shoulders, but her eyes never left the soaring statistics. The initial curiosity had transformed into something almost addictive as each refresh brought a new batch of opinions, memes, analysis clips, and even location maps of the gas station. Some people began discussing Mark Halden's identity, matching his photos with previous events in the town, while others were digging into Darius Cole's background, trying to guess why an FBI agent would show up there. Somewhere in the flow of information, she realized something: this story had gone far beyond a personal incident. It was becoming a test of an entire system, and social media, the virtual crowd, but one with real power, was now holding the balance. As the comment, "There's the camera, there's the law, there's justice, and they still did this," continued to climb, being quoted and repeated, she knew this was no longer a passing curiosity. This was the beginning of a wave that, once it rose, would be hard to stop. At least, not until the story at the gas station had a clear explanation before millions of eyes watching. In the media room of the provincial police department, the light from the large screen spilled across the gray walls, reflecting off the tense faces of the staff sitting at long tables. On the screen was the viral video replaying the moment the FBI badge flashed during the confrontation at the gas station. The sound was muted, but just the image and the words, "You sure you want to do this under the frame," were enough to fill the room with a heavy atmosphere. One staff member was focused on typing while the phone rang continuously from various corners. The ringing clanged like a hammer against an empty barrel, echoing through the space and layering over the rapid keystrokes. On the table in the middle, a stack of unfinished files lay between two cold cups of coffee, dark coffee stains still lingering on the rims. Every time a staff member picked up the phone, the voice on the other end was usually urgent reporters from TV stations, online news outlets, digital news channels, all wanting to confirm details about the viral video. "We want an official Will the officer in the clip be suspended? Does the department know if the man is FBI?" A barrage of questions, sharp as needles, forcing everyone in the room to either respond or deftly dodge. But the increasing number of calls made even avoiding them a difficult task. The door opened, and a middle-aged man in a dark suit stepped in, his thin-framed glasses slightly slipping down his nose. It was Victor Lang, the official spokesperson for the department, just coming from the director's office after the emergency meeting. He placed the file on the table, glanced quickly around the room, then stopped at the large screen showing a close-up of Mark Halden's face. The room went silent for a few seconds, everyone waiting for him to speak. Victor removed his glasses, wiped them with a small cloth, and put them back on, his voice hoarse but clear. "We won't let the press lead the story, but we can't let them say we're silent. A statement will be made immediately." A female staff member in the corner quickly opened a template file, ready to take down the content. Victor took a deep breath, looked at the screen once more, as if carefully considering each word. Then he read slowly, emphasizing each section. "We are aware of the video circulating on social media platforms involving a police officer and an individual believed to be a federal agent. The matter is currently under thorough review and investigation. We ask the public to be patient while the verification process is carried out. Any further information will be communicated officially." His voice was even and low, showing no emotion, but each sentence was carefully placed to avoid falling into any media traps. Another staff member immediately transferred the draft to the final approval department before it was sent to all press outlets and posted on the department's official website. In the hallway, outside, the hurried footsteps of people moving back and forth echoed, signaling that the entire building was being swept up in the pressure no one had been prepared for. Victor turned to a young communications officer, his gaze stern. "Keep in contact 24/7 with social media platforms. Any new content related to this must be reported immediately. If the hashtag continues to rise, we'll need to hold a press conference earlier." The assigned officer nodded, already moving the mouse to open 4 more windows to monitor online trends. On the charts, the number of posts was displayed with curves sharply climbing vertically, accompanied by a heat map showing the areas with the most shares. In the corner of the room, a veteran employee whispered to a colleague that in the past 10 years, this was the first time a case in this small town had attracted such attention. No one said it out loud, but everyone understood that this issue wouldn't stay internal. Just the fact that the FBI had been publicly named was enough for higher authorities to intervene, and when that happens, every step the department takes will be scrutinized closely. Victor stood watching the screen. The frame paused at the exact moment the badge reflected the light, like an unforgettable highlight burned into the viewer's memory. He knew the statement, "We are investigating," was just a temporary measure to calm things down, but what lay ahead was the real challenge. When the phone rang again, he exhaled slowly, signaling for a staff member to pick up, preparing to answer the question he knew would be repeated. Is the officer in the video still on duty? This time, the answer would need more than just a safe statement. Less than an hour after the press release was posted on the department's official website, the internal inbox began to flood with new messages. Among them, an anonymous email was sent to nearly all employees in the system with the cold subject line. The person in the video is indeed FBI. The content was brief, only a few lines, but it went straight to the most sensitive point, confirming the identity of Darius Cole and implying that this was not a random visit, but part of an ongoing investigation. An attached file was a screenshot of an agent's identification profile with a faint red stamp in the upper corner, making it look both real and just blurry enough to cause a stir. The rumor spread quickly through departments like a spark in dry leaves, and within 10 minutes, employees were whispering about it in the cafeteria and hallways. In his private office, Mark Halden sat rigidly in his chair, the light from the computer screen casting a pale glow on his face drained of color. A colleague, passing by, had quietly messaged him a few words, "Check the internal mail." Mark opened the inbox, read the subject line, then stopped at the opening sentence of the email. The words "indeed FBI" seemed to burn into his eyes, making his breath slow and his heart race. In his mind, every image from that afternoon replayed frame by frame, from the sound of the gas pump, the heat of the brick wall, to the moment the wallet opened. Standing at the gas station, he had thought the light from the badge was just a clever trick to apply pressure, but now this email made all his defenses waver. In a small cafe on the outskirts, yellow light spilled across dark wooden tables, the aroma of freshly roasted coffee mingling with the warm scent of baked goods. Darius Cole sat in a secluded corner near the window, his back resting against a faded brick wall with a laptop open in front of him. The screen replayed the viral video from the moment Mark Halden grabbed his collar to the flash of the FBI badge. The light from the screen reflected off Darius's face, but it didn't change the calm expression that was etched into his features. He leaned slightly into the chair, his eyes scanning each frame as if reviewing a classified document, missing no detail. The sound of a spoon stirring coffee from a nearby table was faint, and the wind outside rustled through the trees, creating a steady background hum. But Darius remained fully focused on the screen. He rewound the segment where Mark shoved him against the wall, his opponent's eyes filled with tension, yet tinged with confusion as the badge's reflection flashed. Darius's fingers tapped the keyboard, saving the video and its copies to a secure drive, then opened a separate folder containing files related to the investigation he was conducting. In that folder, audio recordings, photos, and internal reports were organized into a chain of data, linking together like a set of interlocking pieces. He took a sip of his coffee, the bitterness spreading but not slowing his thoughts. Darius picked up his phone from the edge of the table, glanced at the screen for a moment, then dialed. The familiar click sounded on the other end, the signal encrypted to ensure secure communication. His voice was steady, with no unnecessary words. "We have enough evidence." There was no excitement, no sigh of relief, just a firm statement of confirmation, as if he had completed a step in a plan that had already been carefully laid out. The voice on the other end was silent for a few seconds, then replied succinctly, the tone deep with the flavor of someone accustomed to working in the shadow. "Continue with the plan. Everything will be handled at a higher level." Darius nodded slightly, his gaze still fixed on the laptop screen where the frame was paused at the moment the badge's reflection glimmered under the neon light. He closed the laptop, set the phone back on the table, and sat still in the hum of the cafe. Outside, the sky had darkened, and the distant lights of cars on the road faded behind layers of glass. He knew that this moment marked not just the end of a confrontation, but the beginning of a new phase where everything that had been recorded would become the sharp point aimed directly at the heart of the issue. Darius opened his laptop again, the light from the screen reflecting off his calm face, his features showing no sign of urgency or hesitation. In the address bar, He pasted the link to the video that had been uploaded to a secure internal channel, the complete clip from start to finish, along with a brief neutral description that provided enough context for the viewer to understand the situation. His fingers moved quickly on the keyboard, opening a private messaging app and selecting a group of trusted colleagues, those involved in the investigation. The message he typed was brief, just one sentence: "Let the public see how they react." The words had no exclamation marks or emojis, but the certainty in the writing made it clear that the intention was to let the truth spread on its own and for the social reaction to become part of the pressure. He sent the message, the screen displaying the status sent, followed by a few ellipses indicating someone was replying. Darius didn't wait to read the response, his hand gently closing the laptop, the sound of the hinge clicking softly and decisively. He slid the laptop into his worn leather bag, quickly checked his phone to ensure no important notifications were missed, then stood up. The wooden chair beneath him creaked slightly as it was pushed back against the table, mingling with the soft clink of cups and glasses at the bar. Outside the glass window, the sky had turned to a deep evening blue, and the streetlights cast yellow beams onto the road still damp from the short rain. As he stepped outside, he lightly tugged at the collar of his coat, letting the cool breeze from the quiet street wash away the lingering smell of coffee. The doorbell of the cafe chimed briefly as he pushed the door open and then shut it behind him, separating himself from the warm interior. Darius walked slowly toward the car, parked on the curb, each step measured, as if everything had been planned ahead and he was simply moving in rhythm. Inside the bag, the laptop containing the video was no longer just a file, but the catalyst for a chain of reactions that would continue to spread. As his hand touched the car door handle, he glanced one last time at the cafe, his eyes reflecting a quiet determination. Then he opened the door, stepped inside, and the engine's hum blended with the sparse traffic outside, pulling him away from the corner, leaving behind what seemed like a peaceful evening, but was in fact the quiet before a great wave began to rise. Darius sat still for a long time after ending the call, his gaze no longer on the screen but seemingly looking through the window at the quiet street outside. He reopened the laptop, accessed the social media platform where the video was still spreading rapidly, the view counts and comments rising every minute. His hand moved, the mouse clicked the share icon and entered the work email addresses of his close colleagues. In the message box, he typed a short sentence: "Let the public see how they react." No further explanation, no hints, because he knew the recipients would understand as soon as they saw the content. The message was sent, and only a few seconds later, a confirmation appeared in the corner of the screen. He leaned back, slightly closed the laptop with a decisive motion, the soft click blending into the sound of a spoon stirring a cup of coffee at the nearby table. In the cafe, a few customers remained scattered around, mostly locals reading the newspaper or working on their personal computers. An elderly couple sat near the door, speaking in low tones, occasionally laughing, unaware that in the corner of the cafe, a federal agent had just sent out an important link in the case that was now making waves nationwide. Darius glanced at his watch, the second hand ticking steadily, reminding him that the time for this quiet moment was running out. He packed his belongings, neatly slipping the laptop into his leather bag, folding the note with a few brief lines and placing it in the side pocket. The wooden chair creaked softly as he stood up, the sound causing the barista at the counter to look up and nod a greeting, which Darius returned with a slight nod of his own. As he walked toward the door, the outside light grew stronger, highlighting the sharp lines of his face and his deep-set eyes, which seemed to hold an unfinished plan. The doorbell chimed as he pushed the door open. The cool breeze from outside rushed in, bringing the scent of dry leaves and the damp earth from the roadside grass. The outside world felt vastly different from the warm interior of the cafe. The pale blue sky was streaked with white cloud, sunlight filtering down and making the dust particles in the air sparkle. Darius paused for a second to adjust the strap of his bag, then walked briskly toward the parking lot where his black SUV was parked. Each of his steps was measured steady, as if he had already calculated the distance and time needed for the journey. A pickup truck passed by, its tires grinding lightly over the gravel on the roadside. The driver glanced at him, but only for a moment. Darius opened the car door, placed the bag on the passenger's seat, and stood there for a few seconds looking ahead at the road stretching out before him. In that moment, he felt the weight of what he had just sent. The link wouldn't just make its way to his colleagues, it would be analyzed, cross-referenced, and, if necessary, become the catalyst for the next step in the investigation. Once he was seated in the driver's seat, he started the engine. The low hum of the motor, steady and rhythmic. His hand rested on the steering wheel, but his gaze remained fixed on the rearview mirror, reflecting the image of the quietened street after the busy morning. He pressed the accelerator, and the SUV rolled out of the lot, leaving behind the peaceful cafe and the lingering scent of roasted coffee and baked goods in the air. The suburban road stretched out, lined with trees shedding their autumn leaves, each yellow leaf fluttering to the ground, spinning under the wheels. Darius adjusted the radio, but then turned it off, letting the car cabin fill with silence. In his mind, the thoughts kept flowing, piecing together the fragments of information from the gas station incident, the public reaction, and now the impact of the FBI's latest move. Leaving the cafe wasn't just leaving a quiet space, it marked the beginning of a new phase 1 where everything would move faster, more intensely, and there would be no room for retreat. The private meeting room on the top floor of City Hall was sealed shut, the curtains drawn tightly to prevent any outside light from entering. The air inside felt dense, as if it were compressed by the presence of the most powerful faces in town. On the long wooden table in the center, a large screen on the wall displayed the viral clip replaying the moment Mark Halden approached Darius Cole and the FBI badge flashed. The mayor sat at the head of the table, his hands tightly clasped on the table, his gaze fixed on the screen but occasionally glancing quickly at others. The district attorney sat slightly to the right, taking continuous notes, his expression neutral, though the pen in his hand tapped a faster rhythm than usual. On the left was the police chief, slightly hunched, gripping his glass of water so tightly that his fingers turned pale, his eyes betraying the tension he could not hide when Mark's image appeared on the screen. The projector hummed steadily, the sound from the clip cutting clearly through the quiet room, each line of dialogue hammering into the silence. When the video ended, the room fell silent for a few seconds, only the sound of paper rustling as the district attorney turned to a new page in his notes. The mayor leaned forward, his voice low and firm. "We can't stay silent anymore." The words caused a few people to glance up, not in surprise, but because they knew the decisive moment had arrived. The district attorney set his pen down, nodded slightly, and then spoke slowly. "If the information in the internal email is accurate, then we have no choice. The matter has gone beyond the police department's internal jurisdiction. This is a federal issue, and if we don't act proactively, we will be swept up in a wave that's growing stronger by the minute." The police chief gently rotated the glass in his hand as if searching for an escape in his thoughts, but then he exhaled, conceding. "The situation is clear. All attempts to control the information have failed. It's best we work directly with the FBI, at least to minimize the damage." A communications advisor from City Hall spoke up, her voice quick but steady. "We need to prepare an official statement within 24 hours. The speech must acknowledge that the matter is under investigation while emphasizing our commitment to transparency. The longer we wait, the more the town's image will be eroded." The mayor nodded, glancing at the now dark screen before turning to the police chief. "I want a detailed report on Halden's entire file from the moment he joined the force. Any misconduct, if there is any, must be re-examined immediately." No one in the room objected, as they understood that silence at this point would be seen by the public as complicity. The atmosphere in the room thickened as silent glances exchanged between them carried heavy calculations. This emergency meeting was not just about discussing how to react, but also the first step in a mandatory chain of actions where each decision would be scrutinized in detail, not only by the media but also by those in higher power. The mayor stood up, his movements decisive, signaling the end of the initial discussion, but his voice remained deep and clear. From now on, all information will be tightly controlled. We will take the initiative, not follow the reactions. And remember, this is not just about one police officer. This is about the reputation of the entire town. As the people in the room began to gather their materials, the sound of chairs scraping and footsteps blended with the steady hum of the air conditioning, but within each person a new layer of tension built. They all knew that once they stepped out of this room, the story would continue to unfold out there, and every eye would be on how they handled what had just been seen on the screen. The mayor glanced at his wristwatch, his eyes flashing with determination before turning to the district attorney. "We will schedule a hearing within 48 hours. I want every department to have their files, evidence, and response plans ready." His firm statement immediately set the room into motion, assistants quickly taking notes, some reaching for their phones to message their teams. The district attorney nodded, also noting that such a rapid summons would put immense pressure on them, but it was the only way to prove that the government was not avoiding the situation. The police chief remained silent for a long moment, then gave a slight nod, seemingly accepting that all efforts to keep the case under control had become entirely impossible. A security advisor at the meeting spoke up, his voice deep but clear. "We need to prepare for the possibility that questions won't just be about Halden. If the FBI is involved, they could expand the investigation to similar cases, and at that point, the entire personnel record of the department will be reviewed." This remark caused a few people seated below to glance up, exchanging looks full of unspoken understanding. The concern spread quickly as everyone knew that if a case was dug deeper, even small infractions previously overlooked could easily ignite a much larger crisis. The mayor leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers rhythmically on the table, his gaze distant but his voice still firm. "I understand this is not just one case. If the public realizes there's a chain of issues, they won't trust any of our commitments. We need to manage and control the flow of information while handling this to avoid a domino effect." The district attorney agreed, but warned that the press had already begun asking questions about past cases with similarities. Those articles had not yet entered mainstream news, but when the hearing took place, they would certainly surface. The atmosphere in the room grew heavier with every rustle of paper and every tap of a pen on the table echoing loudly. A young assistant handed the mayor a draft of the communications plan, which included the section on Level 2 crisis scenarios, a situation where another issue might surface during the hearing. The mayor skimmed through it, his eyes stopping on lines emphasizing the need for a legal team and spokesperson ready to react immediately. The police chief sighed for the first time during the meeting, showing visible fatigue, then said, "We're standing on thin ice, and I'm not sure how much longer it will hold." When the meeting ended, everyone left the room with quicker steps than when they entered. The hallway outside remained brightly lit, but the light did little to alleviate the sense of gloom that hung over the entire building. Everyone understood that the next 48 hours would be the most tense, not only because of the hearing, but because of what could follow afterward. The concern that this is not just one case had deeply etched itself into everyone's mind, and it would be the silent shadow following them until everything was exposed or buried, if that was still possible. The hearing room was deep inside the government building, just large enough to fit a long table and rows of wooden chairs on either side. The weak yellow light from the low-hanging lamps cast a dull, heavy tone over the space, highlighting the tiny specks of dust floating in the air. The atmosphere felt dense as everyone present remained silent, eyes focused on the chair in the middle, where Darius Cole sat upright, his hands lightly resting on the table. He wore a dark shirt, the collar neatly fastened, his gaze calm but not indifferent. When asked to begin, Darius gave a slight nod and then spoke in a steady, clear voice, recounting the entire incident at the gas station from the moment he left the truck to when the wallet opened. He didn't add any extra details or emphasize personal emotions, simply arranging the events in order, as if he had gathered all the pieces and was placing them on the table for others to assess. The court reporter sat at the corner of the table, the pen moving continuously, transcribing every word Darius spoke, with the occasional rustle of pages being turned. The district attorney placed a thick stack of files in front of him, occasionally bending down to mark a few pages. Across the table, the police chief wore an unreadable expression, his eyes downcast, but occasionally glancing up to closely observe each sentence and pause from Darius. The atmosphere seemed to slow as the story neared its climax, the moment Mark Halden pressed up against him and shoved him into the wall. Darius's voice remained unchanged, but his eyes glinted with coldness as he asked the question, "You sure you want to do this?" in the moment the FBI badge flashed. When he finished speaking, the district attorney gave a slight nod, signaling the technical staff to prepare the video clip. A flat screen was placed at the end of the table. Connected to a small projector, the blue light cast in soft halos on the ceiling. The image appeared, showing the gas station scene in the late afternoon, the surrounding sounds of wind, and the gas pump clearly audible. Everyone in the room turned their eyes toward the screen, and the whispering completely stopped. Darius appeared in the video from the left corner of the frame, slowly walking toward the counter, and then Mark Halden entered, his commanding voice cutting through the air. The details flowed one by one exactly as Darius had described, making the atmosphere even more oppressive due to the perfect alignment. When the moment the badge flashed appeared, a few gazes in the room subtly shifted. No one spoke, but the silence carried more weight than any comment could. The sound in the video stopped abruptly when it ended, and the room fell into stillness with only the hum of the projector. The district attorney turned off the screen and then sat back, his hands clasped in front of him. He looked around the room, briefly stopping at the police chief, then turned to Darius, nodding once more, as if confirming that the story and the evidence had been laid fully before everyone. In the hallway outside, the sound of footsteps echoed, mingling with the rustling of paper files. But inside this narrow room, the atmosphere remained unchanged after the video clip. Those present knew that what they had just heard and seen would serve as the foundation for every decision that would follow, and also the starting point for a chain of reactions that would spread beyond these four walls. Darius sat still, not looking around, his gaze fixed straight ahead as if he had completed his part and was now leaving it to everyone else to draw their conclusions. The lawyer, representing the police, sat slightly to the left, his neat figure in a dark suit, his thin-framed glasses slipping slightly down his nose. He leaned toward the microphone, his voice rising with the confidence honed through hundreds of hearings. "My client acted in a surprise situation, an instinctive reaction to a situation he believed posed a threat. When he saw the man make a move to reach inside his coat, he was forced to make an immediate decision to ensure his own safety and the safety of those around him." The defense echoed evenly, carefully chosen words attempting to paint the action as defensive rather than aggressive. A few people in the room jotted down notes, and a few glances turned toward Darius as if waiting for a response, but he remained still, his gaze unwavering. When the lawyer finished, Darius slowly lifted his head, his hand moving lightly across the table as if to feel the certainty of each grain of wood beneath his fingers. He didn't rush to respond, allowing a brief silence to linger just long enough to make everyone focus intently on the words that were about to come. His voice was deep but clear, each syllable falling like pebbles dropped onto calm water. "That instinct does not have the right to choke a citizen." The short statement, without any lengthy reasoning, carried such weight that the room seemed to pause for a moment. The district attorney leaned slightly forward, his eyes quickly moving between both sides as if registering the stark contrast in the arguments. A few members of the hearing panel exchanged glances, not to discuss immediately, but because they understood that Darius's response had struck at the weakness of the defense of Mark Halden. The police lawyer shifted in his seat, trying to maintain his neutral expression, but the hand resting on the documents had subtly clenched. Meanwhile, Darius remained in his position, his gaze fixed forward, neither showing victory nor any emotion other than the certainty that he had just stated something irrefutable. The tapping of the court reporter's pen echoed steadily, transcribing the exchange word for word. That sound, along with the slow turning of the ceiling fan, became the backdrop to a tightening atmosphere, as if everyone in the room was quietly reassessing the limits of the concept of instinct when placed within the framework of the law and citizen rights. Outside, the weak afternoon light began to turn gray, seeping through the gap in the curtains and casting faint long streaks on the wall, further darkening the space within the room. The presiding officer sat at the center of the table, his hand lightly tapping on the stack of papers in front of him to regain everyone's focus. He announced that they would proceed with the direct questioning, but no one could ignore the lingering effect of the previous exchange. It was not a long-winded debate, but rather a sharp, concise remark, cutting deep enough to leave a mark, forcing those listening to face the undeniable truth, power, and responsibility cannot be excused by impulsive reactions, especially when they lead to the most basic violation of personal freedom. The police department's record storage was located in an old basement, the weak yellow light from the long fluorescent bulbs casting down on the rusted metal shelves. A thick layer of dust covered the bulky files, and each time one was pulled out, a cloud of fine dust rose and lingered in the air. Two internal investigators wearing rubber gloves carefully turned each page, their eyes scanning through the patrol reports and temporary detention logs. A file with a faded label was pulled out, its corners worn, containing old reports stacked on top of one another. As they compared the data, they began to notice a series of troubling coincidences in the past 2 years. At least 6 incidents involving the abuse of power by the same group of officers, with Mark Halden's name appearing in all of the report. These incidents were scattered across different locations, but the common factor was that they occurred in places with few direct witnesses, and most reports ended with the same assertion that the suspect exhibited suspicious behavior, requiring the police to subdue them to ensure safety. One investigator used a red pen to mark each case, his eyes widening with seriousness as he recognized the repeating pattern. The margin notes showed that some incidents had been complained about, but lacked sufficient evidence for action, and now the appearance of the video from the gas station was opening up an opportunity to link them all together. As they were still reviewing, the door to the storage room opened, and a young employee entered holding a large envelope, breathing slightly heavier. He briefly explained a new witness brought in a dash cam video. The file on the table was temporarily set aside as both investigators opened the envelope, pulling out a USB drive and a handwritten note. The note indicated that the person had driven past the gas station incident, and the dash cam had recorded the entire event from a different angle. They plugged the USB into the computer in the corner of the room, and the screen immediately displayed footage from the low angle of the dash cam. The image was clearer than expected, starting from the moment Mark stepped out of the patrol car and quickly approached Darius. From this angle, the action of grabbing the collar and pushing him into the wall was clearer, as was Darius's calm reaction before pulling out his wallet. The sound captured enough of the key dialogue along with footsteps and the wind. When the FBI badge flashed, this angle captured Mark's slightly startled glance, a detail that the original video filmed by a passerby had not clearly shown. One of the investigators paused the video, rewound, and zoomed in on the frame, making a note in the report. Clear change in reaction when the badge is seen. This was a crucial piece of evidence, further supporting Darius's testimony and providing a foundation to re-examine all 6 prior cases. If the previous victims described similar events, the likelihood of confirming systematic abuse of power would increase significantly. The atmosphere in the record storage room, once calm, has now become urgent. Other files were pulled from the shelves and stacked in piles for comparison. comparison. One investigator called the prosecutor's office, reporting that they had new visual evidence and recommending an expansion of the investigation. Meanwhile, the young employee who had brought the USB stood by his gaze, slightly anxious as he listened to the rapid exchanges around him. He knew that he had just handed them something that could change the course of the entire case and potentially lead to an unprecedented internal review at the police department. The sounds of keyboard typing, paper flipping, and printers starting to whir began to fill the small space. The dust on the shelves still hung in the air, but the atmosphere had completely shifted, no longer the stillness of a storage basement, but the hurried pace of people who knew that with each passing minute the story outside was growing and that the evidence they had just found would soon become the focus of the next hearing. The bulky files piled up on the table, surrounded by computer screens displaying multiple windows at once, each showing a different case related to the suspected police group. The evidence was piling up, no longer a few scattered notes or vague testimonies, but a system of data including reports, videos, photos, and witness testimonies, all interwoven into a clear picture. Each old case, when revisited, had strange similarities to the incident at the gas station. The approach, threatening language, and the note in the reports stating that the suspect exhibited suspicious behavior without specifying what that behavior was. The repetition could no longer be seen as a coincidence, and with each new piece of evidence added the possibility of proving a pattern of systematic abuse of power grew significantly. While the investigators were organizing the documents to prepare their report for higher-ups, the internal email inbox suddenly displayed a new message. With the simple but immediately attention-grabbing subject, "I was instructed to do this." The sender was a young officer who had been in the force for less than 3 years. The message was short and straightforward, yet cautious, recounting how he had been instructed by his superior to apply aggressive tactics with certain individuals believed to be trouble, even when there was no clear indication of criminal activity. He specifically described a patrol incident where he was ordered to pin a man's collar and push him into a wall to test the reaction, despite there being no immediate threat at the time. This email was quickly printed and added to the case file with a request to protect the sender's identity to prevent retaliation. For the investigation team, this was a valuable piece of the puzzle, as it not only reinforced the suspected behavior pattern but also proved that such methods may have been passed on as an unofficial directive within the department. Testimonies like this, if cross-referenced with evidence from other cases, would form a solid foundation for charges and help prevent further incidents. The atmosphere in the office, already tense, grew even heavier. One investigator read the email, then silently nodded and opened the contact list to find a way to reach out and protect this new witness. Another quickly added details to the summary report, marking this as the first internal testimony with a direct admission. On the screen, the case summary table appeared with columns for date, location, involved persons, and evidence, which began to fill up. Each added line was another link, making the overall picture harder to deny. In the hallway outside, the sound of hurried footsteps showed that the entire building was busier than usual. The door to the room was closed, and inside, the incessant sound of keyboard typing mixed with the continuous hum of printers. Alongside the stack of paper files, electronic reports were saved in chronological order, ready to be presented at the upcoming hearing. With the speed at which evidence was being added, no one in the team doubted that the incident at the gas station had become the spark for a large-scale investigation, the results of which could bring about widespread changes within the entire department. The newsroom of a major newspaper was in its peak hours, with long rows of desks covered in computers, phones ringing continuously, and the sound of keyboards typing forming a rapid background rhythm. On the large screen hanging in the center of the room, the homepage of the newspaper displayed the headline that had just been approved, "When the Police Forget They're Being Investigated." Below was a close-up image of the FBI badge, its reflective sheen sharply outlined, captured from the most famous famous frame of the gas station video. The editorial team had decided to use this image as the visual focal point, knowing it was the moment that made the whole story undeniable. Reporters huddled around a conference table, holding notes and discussing new avenues for coverage. One investigative reporter had contacted sources in the field to verify details, while another was going through old cases involving Mark Halden to identify recurring behavioral patterns. The deeper they went, the more shady reports they discovered, all written in the same style as if copied from a pre-existing script. On the internal bulletin board, new headline ideas were written in bold, read, "The cases that were ignored. The force through the eyes of witnesses. When power surpasses the law." In the corner of the room, the photo editing team was refining each close-up shot, making sure the FBI badge remained prominent without becoming blurred when posted online. A veteran reporter known for her exposés on public corruption was tasked with writing the lead article. She began her opening by detailing the moment the badge flashed, then tied it to the larger context of the investigation, guiding readers from surprise to outrage over the abuse of power. Every sentence was carefully crafted to be sharp yet legally sound. The article was scheduled to be published later that afternoon, but first the chief editor wanted to post a brief update on social media to drive traffic. The update included just the headline, the close-up photo of the badge, and a provocative line, "This moment changes the entire investigation." Within minutes of posting, the shares skyrocketed and comments flooded in by the thousands, with many directly tagging Mark Halden and the police department applying direct pressure. A group of photojournalists was dispatched to the scene, stopping by the gas station to capture images from similar angles as the original video, and then interviewing local residents about their thoughts. The responses varied, ranging from anger to wariness, but most emphasized that this was not the first time they had heard of such incidents. Meanwhile, another editor was compiling an infographic that tracked the timeline from the moment the incident occurred to when the video went viral, highlighting key milestones of the investigation. By the end of the morning, the entire news system was ready. The main article was placed on the front page with the prominent image of the badge right under the headline, followed by a quote from Darius during the hearing. As the publishing hour approached, the entire newsroom seemed to hold its breath for a few seconds before the notification of page views began pouring in relentlessly. The number of readers grew faster than even the day's hottest news, proving that the story had extended far beyond the small town's borders. Not stopping at just reporting the news, the newsroom had already planned the next series of articles focusing on related incidents and the response of authorities. They knew that this was not just a career opportunity, but also a time for the press to show its role as a watchdog of power. Amid the mix of keyboard clacking phone rings and frantic exchanges, one thing became clear: the press had entered the fray, and from now on every development would be exposed to the light, with the FBI badge symbolizing the turning point of the entire story. Less than an hour after the main article went live, the online comment section flooded with debates that spanned dozens of lines. Among them, a series of analyses about the police culture in various jurisdictions stood out, shared by researchers and former officers. They referred to it as guilty until proven innocent, a deeply ingrained habit that had become instinctual, where anyone deemed suspicious was treated like a criminal until proven otherwise. The most widely shared analysis came from an expert on organizational behavior who cited studies on the impact of bias and power on split-second decisions, particularly in situations where law enforcement felt they were facing potential danger. His closing statement made a huge impact. Once this culture is accepted as the norm, it becomes a license to break the law, and then the line between protection and violation becomes blurred. On social media, thousands of people commented under the articles sharing personal experiences or those of their relatives who had encountered similar situations. These stories, even from different states, all followed the same pattern: being stopped for vague reasons, subjected to heavy-handed measures without explanation, and then having to spend considerable time and effort proving their innocence. This caused the wave of outrage over Mark Halden's case to spread not only beyond the town, but also across the entire nation. Journalists quickly realized that they were facing a story of symbolic importance, a case that could open up a broader discussion on reform and accountability. While the press continued to explore the legal and historical aspects of the issue in real life, the petition movement to have Mark Halden fired was accelerating at an unprecedented pace. What started as an online petition initiated by a small group of town citizens quickly spread across platforms fueled by the video and accompanying analysis. Accounts with large followings, including some public figures and artists, openly called for signatures, arguing that removing individuals who abuse power was the first step toward restoring trust. The numbers on the petition's signature tally steadily increased, and within 3 days the count surpassed 250,000. Notably, many of the signatures came from people outside the state and even from other countries, reflecting the widespread attention that transcended local boundaries. Many signatories included comments explaining their support, ranging from a desire for justice to viewing this as a strong message to the entire system. The campaign organizers also cleverly coordinated with police reform advocacy groups, using data from 6 similar incidents over the past 2 years to strengthen the argument that this was not an isolated case. They created a website summarizing the evidence, quoting testimonies, and providing links to academic articles on the guilty until proven innocent culture, turning the petition into a comprehensive advocacy resource. The pressure from 250,000 signatures quickly reached the ears of lawmakers and the state police oversight board. Some politicians began including the issue in their speeches, cautiously acknowledging but not hiding their belief that the incident at the gas station had sparked a crisis of trust. From a viral video, the story had become the center of a national debate, where the actions of one individual were being used as a magnifying lens to scrutinize an entire law enforcement culture that was now under question. The main courtroom was brightly lit with rows of wooden benches arranged in sections for the public press and involved parties. A soft murmur filled the air as people found their seats, but it quickly fell silent when the door opened and the prosecutor entered carrying a thick file. He walked to the wooden podium in the center of the room, placed the file down, adjusted the microphone, and began reading the indictment in a clear, steady voice. In the solemn atmosphere, the phrases echoed like hammer blows: unlawful use of force, abuse of power in the execution of duty, violation of citizen rights protected by federal law. Each charge was accompanied by the time, location, and a detailed description of the action cited by the prosecutor from both video footage and witness testimony. When he reached the description of the moment, Mark Halden grabbed Darius Cole by the collar. The sound of the microphone reverberated through the room, causing some people in the public seating to shake their heads or exchange looks. The prosecutor did not stop with the incident at the gas station, but also listed details related to 6 similar cases discovered during the internal investigation, emphasizing that this was systematic behavior, not an isolated incident. In the defendant's row, Mark sat upright, his hands tightly clasped on his lap. His face was rigid, jaw clenched, his eyes staring straight ahead but not focusing on any fixed point. Occasionally, he blinked quickly, as if to hide a fleeting moment of confusion, but there was no objection or interruption as the prosecutor continued reading. His defense attorney sat beside him quickly, flipping through the pages of the file, occasionally leaning over to whisper something, but Mark remained silent, merely nodding as a reflex, neither agreeing nor disagreeing. The atmosphere in the courtroom grew denser with each line of the indictment. The sound of pens scribbling and the clattering of keyboards from the press section filled the air, each new charge quickly being recorded in the headline of an unfolding news story. The prosecutor concluded the reading with a firm statement that all the charges were based on direct evidence, verified documentation, and testimonies from witnesses under scrutiny. He closed the file, the thick cover making a soft thud, but it felt like a temporary full stop to his presentation. The judge nodded, acknowledging the indictment and announcing the transition to the next procedural step. In that brief moment of silence, all eyes from the public seating reporters and even the involved parties turned to Mark. He maintained his cold expression, but the lingering silence made his face seem like a mask struggling to conceal the turmoil within. No one knew whether he was calculating, denying, or accepting, but everyone understood that from this moment on the story had officially entered a phase where every action of his would be scrutinized in detail under the spotlight of the law. The judge sat at the high podium, the light from the window casting a calm yet stern expression on his face. After flipping through the final pages of the case file and exchanging a brief word with the court clerk, he struck the gavel 3 times, the sound echoing throughout the courtroom. His voice was deep and clear, each word striking the air. Defendant Mark Halden is suspended indefinitely, pending the results of the investigation and subsequent trial. During this time, the defendant is prohibited from participating in any activities related to law enforcement. The decision was read decisively, leaving no room for negotiation or immediate response from the defense. Below, murmurs spread through the public seating, mostly sighs of relief or whispered remarks. The press area immediately filled with the rapid tapping of keyboards as article headlines were updated in real time. Mark remained motionless, his gaze cast downward, his expression unreadable, but his shoulders slightly tensed as if the decision had fallen heavily upon him. The defense attorney leaned in to speak softly in his ear, but Mark did not respond, merely nodding before looking straight up at the judge's bench. In the witness section, Darius Cole sat upright, his hands interlaced on the table. When a reporter quietly asked during a break in the trial what he thought about the decision, Darius turned his head slightly, his voice calm but firm. This is a matter between them and the law. He showed neither triumph nor disappointment, simply reiterating a fundamental principle, that from this moment on the handling of Mark Halden was no longer a personal matter but part of the legal process of the entire system. Darius's words quickly spread across news platforms, many viewing them as a message underscoring the distinction between personal actions and the power of the law. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere seemed to settle a beat after his statement, as it clarified one thing. This was no longer just a personal conflict, but a case to test the fairness and transparency of the public authorities. The judge acknowledged the final statements before concluding the session and set the date for the next hearing. When the gavel struck for the final time, people began to rise, the sound of chairs scraping and footsteps blending into the familiar noise of a session wrapping up. Darius stood up, adjusted his coat collar, and scanned the room before stepping out. Mark remained seated for a few more seconds before leaving through a separate exit with the court officers, leaving behind the audience with a mixture of curiosity and judgment. Outside in the hallway, the crowd dispersed in 2 directions, with reporters following key figures to gather additional comments. Darius didn't stop for long, walking slowly through the crowd, leaving unanswered questions in his wake. In his mind, the most important thing had already been established. This story was now in the hands of the law, and it would be the law that would determine the final outcome. The early autumn sunlight filtered through the classroom window on the 2nd floor of a high school. Outside, the maple trees began to change colors, patches of bright red and yellow scattered among the green leaves, with the wind blowing a few dry leaves in circles falling to the ground below. Inside, a faint scent of chalk dust hung in the air as students sat in neat rows, their wooden desks old but still clean, the surface polished by generations of use. On the smartboard at the front of the class, a paused image from the gas station video was clearly visible. Frozen at the moment, Mark Halden stepped up to Darius Cole, gripping his collar with the FBI badge flashing brightly right after. The teacher stood next to the board, her gaze serious but not cold. She turned to the students, speaking clearly. Today, we will discuss a real-life case that has captured the attention of the whole country. You will watch part of the video and then share your thoughts on what you see, linking it to citizens' rights and the responsibilities of law enforcement. A click echoed as she pressed play, the video slowing down so every detail could be observed. Mark's steps, Darius's gaze, the narrowing distance, the tense words exchanged, and finally the moment the wallet opened. As the class, all eyes were fixed on the screen and no one spoke until the video ended. A brief silence fell, followed by the sound of chairs shifting as a few students leaned in to quietly discuss with their neighbors. The teacher looked around and then asked, "What do you think about this situation?" A hand from the third row of desks raised a male student's voice, hesitant but honest. "If it were me, I'd probably be scared," he said, slightly bowing his head, his gaze still on the screen as though visualizing the scene, but now imagining himself in the position of the person being stopped. His simple words made a few other students nod quietly, some clicking their pens, others gripping them tightly as if to hide the tension spreading among them. A female student sitting near the window spoke next, "I think being scared is normal, but if you're an agent like in the video, you have to stay calm. I see he's so calm, and it makes me wonder how he could keep it together." The teacher nodded slightly quickly, writing fear and calm on the board, then asked the class, "Why do you think these two reactions are important when we talk about rights and laws?" The classroom began to buzz with more energy as small groups discussed. A student in the back row said loudly, "If I'm scared, I might do something that makes the situation worse. But if I'm calm, I can think of ways to protect myself and know when to ask for my rights." The teacher smiled, continuing to guide the conversation. "So what do you think is the responsibility of law enforcement in this situation?" Another student, confidently, "They need to stay calm first because they have power and weapons. If they lose their calm, it's the other person who will suffer the consequences." The comment made several heads nod in agreement, and some students looked back at the screen, clearly connecting the story from the gas station to the lesson they were learning in class. The teacher moved on to a brief analysis relating the case to the constitutional provisions on the inviolability of the person and the right to be protected from the unlawful use of force. She emphasized that the video was not just a story circulating on social media, but a clear testament to the need for these rights to be understood, protected, and enforced in every situation. In the classroom, the atmosphere was a blend of learning and curiosity, as the students realized this was not a dry theoretical lesson, but a real-world scenario that anyone could witness or experience. A male student in the front row, who had been silent up until that point, suddenly spoke up. "I think if someone records a video, it's also a way to protect justice. If it weren't for this video, people wouldn't know the truth." The teacher immediately wrote citizen evidence on the board and explained that in the age of technology, recording images and sound is a powerful tool for monitoring power, but it must be done legally to avoid violating others' privacy rights. As the discussion neared its end, the teacher turned off the screen, letting the class sit in silence for a few seconds before speaking. "The most important thing for you to remember is not just how to react when faced with a tough situation, but understanding your rights and knowing that the law exists to protect everyone, both citizens and law enforcement. This balance is only achieved when both sides respect their boundaries." The bell rang to end the class, but many students lingered, some taking pictures of the notes on the board, others opening their phones to search for more information about the case. Outside, the schoolyard buzzed with students changing classes, but inside the room, the lingering echoes of the gas station incident remained a reminder that today's lesson was not just in textbooks, but unfolding right outside the school gates. The teacher stood still for a few seconds after observing the students' expressions, then took a piece of white chalk and wrote clearly in the corner of the board, "Justice starts where you stand." Her voice was firm but steady, resonating throughout the room. This means that no matter where you are, whether a student, a citizen, or a random witness, the way you choose to act when you see something wrong will determine whether justice has a chance to appear. We can't always change the outcome, but our initial choice will be the starting point for everything that follows. These words caused the class to quiet down, not out of tension, but because each student was imagining themselves in situations that seemed distant, yet incredibly relatable. At a desk near the back, a skinny boy, his hair tousled slightly by the wind, silently pulled a small notebook from his bag. He didn't look up, his fountain pen swiftly moving across the lined paper, writing a neat but heavy sentence. "Don't look away when you see something wrong." After finishing, he paused, gazing down at his words as if making a promise to himself, rather than writing for anyone else to read. The feeling wasn't loud or showy, but it was a quiet, strong commitment deeply ingrained in the mind of a young person. The teacher continued her lesson, telling real-life stories of ordinary people who made significant changes simply by not turning away from injustice. She mentioned a neighbor who called the police upon seeing children being neglected, a driver who stopped to help an accident victim, and a student who bravely spoke up when a classmate was being bullied in the schoolyard. Each story was told with warmth, and the class listened in silence as if each example further ingrained in the students' minds the importance of standing in the right place when justice needs to be protected. The boy with messy hair closed his notebook, sat up straight, and looked at the teacher. His gaze was no longer shy like it had been before, but brighter, as though he had found something solid to hold on to. The words in his notebook became an anchor, and he felt that if a similar situation arose one day, he wouldn't stay silent. Outside the window, the soft wind still slipped through the gaps in the changing maple leaves, and the sunlight illuminated the tiny dust particles hanging in the air, creating a peaceful scene that contrasted with the powerful meaning of the lesson that had just been planted in the students' minds. The bell rang to signal the end of the class, and the students stood up, the sound of chairs scraping and footsteps echoing evenly. The boy put his notebook into his bag, his hand instinctively brushing the cover as if to cement the words he had just written. The teacher gathered her materials, her eyes scanning the class one last time before stepping out into the hallway. On the board, the sentence, "Justice starts where you stand," remained the white chalk clearly visible against the green background, a reminder that would stay longer than the lesson itself etched in the memory of those who had heard and thought about it. The reading room of the town library was bathed in the warm yellow light from fabric-shaded desk lamps, the scent of old books blending in the air, creating a feeling both common and familiar. Tall wooden shelves filled with aged books, their spines fading with time, stood in neat rows, creating narrow aisles that led deep into the room. At a table near the large window, Darius Cole sat with his laptop open in front of him, a cold paper coffee cup beside it. The sound of typing filled the space as he scrolled through his inbox until his gaze landed on a short subject line, "Thank you." He opened the email, and the simple but sincere words appeared. The sender was a citizen from another state, saying they had been following the incident at the gas station from the beginning, and felt a renewed sense of hope when they saw him maintain his composure and principles during such a tense situation. "What you did shows me that there are still people who don't use power to crush others, but to keep things on track," the final line read. Darius read it slowly, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth before typing a brief reply, just enough to let the sender know their thanks had been received and were appreciated. At the next table, a group of young people was quietly talking, occasionally glancing over at Darius. Eventually, one of them gathered the courage to approach and ask if he could share a few thoughts about the incident that everyone had seen online. Darius looked up, gave a slight nod, and closed his laptop. The young man, along with a few friends, sat across from him, their expressions eager but slightly nervous. A girl in the group spoke first. "We think it's really amazing how you stood firm and didn't let them overpower you. How did you manage to do that?" Darius looked at each face before him, his voice steady but warm. "You don't always win right away." He paused briefly to make sure they were listening, then continued. "There are times when you do everything right, but the result isn't immediate, or worse, you have to face people trying to bring you down. What matters is that you stay on course, because justice doesn't always come quickly, but it will come if you're persistent and don't give up." The young people listened, some nodding, others exchanging glances as they thought it over. One boy asked, "But what if everyone around me tells me to let it go?" Darius responded, his gaze unwavering. "Then you need to remember why you started. If the reason is strong enough, you'll stand even if you stand alone. And sometimes all it takes is one person to stand firm for others to find their courage." Outside the window, the afternoon sunlight poured over the trees, casting long shadows onto the library's wooden floor. The sounds of pages turning, pencils writing, and paper rustling blended with Darius's calm words, creating a space that was both peaceful and full of meaning. When the conversation ended, the young people thanked him and left the table, their expressions noticeably lighter but more thoughtful than when they had arrived. Darius watched them go, his hand lightly stirring his cold coffee cup, and in that moment he realized that sometimes the greatest strength doesn't lie in winning immediately, but in planting a seed of faith and letting it grow in others' hearts. One of the girls from the group of young people had not left yet, still standing near Darius's table, her hand lightly holding the strap of her backpack as if contemplating something. After a few seconds of silence, she sat down in the chair across from him, her expression more serious than before. Her voice was quiet but clear. What if no one had recorded it that day? The simple question seemed to fill the peaceful space of the library with a subtle tension. Darius leaned slightly back in his chair, keeping his eyes on her, and replied succinctly without hesitation. Maybe no one would have believed it. His words were not just an observation, but a cold truth he had witnessed countless times throughout his career. The girl remained silent for a moment, then nodded slightly, her gaze dropping to the worn wooden table. "I think so," she said, her voice softening, "because I've seen things that no one believed just because there was no evidence." Darius noticed the shift in her expression and leaned forward, his voice lowering but still firm. "Evidence is the shield that protects the truth, but it's also a sharp knife for those who fear the truth being exposed. That day without the phone, everything might have been told in a completely different way." A moment of silence passed between them, broken only by the sound of books being flipped from a nearby table and the soft scratching of a pencil on someone's notebook. Darius spoke slowly, continuing, "What's sad is that in many cases the truth exists, but is drowned out by power or carefully crafted narratives. That's why anyone who has the opportunity to capture a crucial moment is holding a piece of justice in their hands." The girl looked up, her eyes brighter, as if she now understood the value of the question she had asked. He didn't add more details about the incident at the gas station, nor did he need to repeat what the media had said, but the way he spoke about the potential for the truth to be forgotten gave the story a different weight. The girl smiled faintly, not out of happiness, but because she felt she had learned something not found in any textbook. "I think I understand now," she said, then stood up, giving a slight nod before walking out of the reading room. Darius remained seated, his gaze directed out the window, where the evening light was gradually softening on the rows of trees. He knew that not everyone had the chance to see the full truth, but those who had touched it would never view the world the same way again. And sometimes just a question like the one from the girl was enough to remind him that the fight for justice doesn't only happen in the courtroom, but also begins in very small moments in ordinary places like this old reading room. In a small apartment at the end of a quiet street, the warm glow of a yellow desk lamp illuminated a wooden table covered with handwritten papers, old photographs, and an antique typewriter. Outside the window, night had fallen, with only the soft sound of a wind slipping through the cracks and the distant hum of late-night traffic. The man sat at the desk, his silver hair and slightly stooped shoulders a testament to age, holding a pen as if considering each word carefully. He was a retired police officer, having left the force nearly 10 years ago. But in his mind, the images from his time wearing the badge were as vivid as if they were yesterday. The first words appeared on the blank page. I used to do this, thinking it was procedure. The handwriting slanted slightly to the right, shaky yet clear. He paused, sighed, and continued writing. The sentences slowly formed, describing instances when he and his colleagues used force against individuals deemed potential threats, even though in reality, many times these were just drivers who looked unfamiliar or acted suspicious. He recalled the feeling at the time, believing he was merely following protocol to ensure safety. But now looking back, he realized that this procedure was unchecked, and in many cases, it was not even in line with the law. The pen stopped for a moment before he wrote on, I'm not proud, but I don't want to be silent anymore. Each word seemed to lift a portion of the burden he had carried for years. He remembered an incident more than 2 decades ago when he had forcibly pulled a young man out of his car just because the man didn't respond quickly when asked for his papers. The next day, the incident was reported as a necessary action to prevent risk. No one questioned it, and he never questioned himself. But when he saw the video of the incident involving Darius Cole, old memories resurfaced, forcing him to face the truth that he had once been part of a system accustomed to crossing boundaries. He wrote continuously, recounting situations where he had witnessed colleagues exploit loopholes in the procedure to justify acts of abuse of power. In the quiet room, the scratching of the pen on paper became the only rhythm interspersed with his deep sighs as he untangled each knot in his memory. When the final lines were written, he read the entire letter again, then signed it, his hand trembling slightly, but his gaze firmer. This letter would not be sent immediately to a newsroom or government agency. First, he wanted to send it to the investigative team handling Darius's case as a missing piece from someone who had been inside the system. He folded the letter, placed it in an envelope, sealed it, and set it atop a stack of documents ready for delivery. Outside, the streetlights cast shadows through the curtains, stretching his silhouette across the wall. In that moment, he knew he had done what should have been done long ago, a confession not seeking forgiveness, but to break the silence that had swallowed too many truths. The letter was sent with only one initial address, but it didn't take long for it to appear in a private group of former officers who had worked with the man. At first, a few people skimmed through it, leaving short emojis, but then the segments of the letter were quoted, followed by longer comments, even stories that had never been mentioned before. Some expressed surprise, while others admitted they had witnessed or even been involved in similar situations only to choose to forget them. The phrase, I used to do this, thinking it was procedure, became a hot topic of debate, as it reflected an issue that many in the profession had silently understood but rarely spoken about. The line between duty and abuse of power was often blurred by the very habits and culture within the force. From the private group, the letter slowly started to spread outside, not publicly in a rush, but enough for those following the Darius Cole case to read it. Some investigative journalists who had been tracking the case quickly recognized the value of this confession. They didn't rush to publish the entire content, but quoted key sentences to illustrate articles analyzing the formation of an unwritten procedure within law enforcement. Each time an excerpt appeared, more people reached out to the investigative team, sharing their experiences as if the letter had opened a door to memories that had long been locked away. When the information about the letter reached Darius, he wasn't surprised, but he paused for a long time in front of the screen, reading and rereading every line. For him, this wasn't just a personal act from a retired officer, but a sign that a part of the system was beginning to look at itself. In a private conversation with a member of the investigation team, he said slowly but firmly, Change starts with the courage to admit. It wasn't a shallow encouragement, but the conclusion of someone who understood that real reform begins with confronting the truth, no matter how difficult it is to accept. Darius's words quickly spread not only among journalists or the investigative team, but also were quoted by many people on social media as a slogan. It touched on a simple yet often overlooked principle: you can't fix something unless someone has the courage to admit that it's wrong. As the story at the gas station went far beyond a singular incident, his words became an important piece, linking the scattered confessions into a collective message that justice can not only be demanded from the outside, but must also be built from within. In the small apartment where the letter had been written, the elderly man was unaware that his words had created a ripple effect. But in another corner of the town, Darius understood the impact, and he knew this was the moment when the cracks in the wall of silence were starting to spread. And when those cracks became wide enough, the light of change would find its way through. The afternoon in the town's central park was bathed in a soft golden light from the early sunset, with a light breeze blowing through the trees, making the leaves rustle like gentle hands waving. The square was cordoned off with white ribbon, and a small temporary stage was set up in the center, covered in black fabric with a microphone attached. The townspeople had gathered early, many holding prints from the video at the gas station, the image of the FBI badge flashing in front of Mark Halden standing out. Some had framed the pictures in wooden frames, others taped them to cardboard to hold up high, all pointing towards the same symbol of truth that had been captured and shared. The sound of hurried footsteps mixed with quiet conversations filled the air. A group of high school students in uniform stood close together holding signs with phrases like "civil rights are human rights" or "no one is above the law." Nearby, an elderly woman sat on a folding chair with a faded photo from a different incident years ago in her hands, her eyes distant as if recalling something no one else knew. Along the cobbled path, small stands handed out white ribbons for attendees to pin on their shirts, creating a sea of people unified in color. 3 p.m., a long bell chimed through the loudspeakers scattered around the park, signaling that the moment of silence was about to begin. All conversation ceased, and even the rustling of leaves seemed to quiet. The host stepped up to the stage, his voice deep and solemn. "We will take a moment of silence to honor those whose civil rights have been violated, and to remind ourselves that justice requires the vigilance of all." As he finished speaking, he bowed his head, and the entire square immediately fell into absolute silence. In that moment of silence, everyone seemed to relive the first time they saw the video at the gas station. Some remembered the anger they felt, others thought of the helplessness, while some simply remembered how they couldn't tear their eyes away from the screen. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting down on serious faces, reflecting off the raised photos, making the colors of the images stand out even more against the fading sky. A boy stood beside his mother, holding her hand tightly, his eyes never leaving the picture in front, as if trying to understand why a single story could bring so many people together. When the moment of silence ended, the bell rang again, soft yet clear, bringing everyone back to the present. A round of applause spread across the park, not with loud cheers, but with a steady rhythmic sound, like a collective affirmation that they were still here, still caring, still watching. The host looked up, thanked everyone for being present, and then invited a few community representatives to share their thoughts. One by one, speeches followed discussing the importance of remembering and taking action, emphasizing that today's event wasn't to reopen old wounds, but to turn them into a driving force for change. At the edge of the crowd, Darius Cole stood quietly, neither stepping onto the stage nor trying to attract attention. He simply listened, his eyes scanning the faces, acknowledging the diversity of those present, from students, workers, and artists to the elderly. When the final round of applause rang out, He gave a small nod, as if acknowledging that the memories and solidarity shared here were the strongest foundation to ensure that justice would not be forgotten. The sun slowly dipped behind the trees, leaving the sky bathed in amber hues. The townspeople began to disperse, but many still held their photos in hand, unwilling to put them away just yet. At the exit, a group of young people carefully gathered the white ribbons, promising to use them for future events. In the gentle stillness of the late afternoon, the park seemed to hold on to the resonance of the silent moment, the kind of stillness not just for remembrance, but as a reminder that from such moments the strength to change can still be found and nurtured. A middle-aged woman holding the hand of her 10-year-old son slowly walked along the cobbled path. In her hand was a printout of the photo from the gas station video, with the image of Darius's calm gaze in the face of oppression clearly visible. She stopped in front of the stage area, bent down to adjust her son's baseball cap, and quietly said, her voice firm but not harsh, not to honor, but to remind that this happened. The boy looked up at his mother, seemingly not fully understanding, but her gaze remained fixed on the picture as if she wanted to engrave every detail into her memory. A person standing nearby heard the words, nodded subtly, understanding that the event wasn't meant to erect statues or give titles, but to preserve a vivid reminder of the thin line between justice and abuse of power. Near the ribbon distribution area, a group of volunteers set up a large whiteboard for people to write their thoughts. Various messages began to appear, ranging from calls for change to quotes about civil rights. Among them, one line stood out, written in bold black ink, the letters straight and strong. Ask the name before asking the reason. The simplicity of this phrase caused many people to stop and read it, then take a photo as if to bring it home. It was both a reminder of basic courtesy in communication and a subtle protest against the cold approach that treats people first as subjects to be tested rather than individuals with dignity and names of their own. A young couple stood in front of the board for quite a while. The wife whispered softly, "If everyone started like this, maybe there wouldn't be as many incidents like that." The husband remained silent, his arm around his wife's shoulder, his eyes still fixed on the words on the board. Around them, others continued to write, each line representing a perspective, a piece of the shared story. Some wrote with determination, others with a more reflective tone, but all converged on the idea that change starts with the smallest of acts. From a short distance, Darius observed the scene, his hands tucked into his coat pocket. He noticed the differences in how people participated. Some came just to witness, some brought messages they wanted to share, and others simply wanted their children to understand that history isn't always beautiful, but must be remembered to prevent it from repeating. When his eyes landed on the phrase, "Ask the name before asking the reason," the corners of his mouth twitched slightly, not out of joy, but because he realized the power of a simple sentence that could convey more than a lengthy speech ever could. The atmosphere in the park was both peaceful and reflective. The rustling of leaves blended with the sound of pens writing on boards, the constant clicking of cameras, and occasionally the sound of children asking their parents about the meaning of the words. Whether simple or detailed, these explanations were passing a message from one generation to the next. The woman and her son had left, but her words lingered in the air like a reminder. Today's event wasn't just a memory, but a mark to remind everyone of their responsibility when faced with injustice. As the sun fully set, the park's light shifted to the warm yellow of the streetlights, and the board stood there growing thicker with new lines of writing. Darius left the park, but before he did, he paused to look at the board one last time, giving a small nod as if to remember both the words and the faces that had paused before it. In that moment, he understood that the simplest messages are often the most lasting foundations for a community to begin changing. The small coffee shop nestled on the corner of an old street, the rich scent of roasted coffee blending with the woodsy aroma of the dark tables, creating a warm fragrance that drowned out the sound of the rain tapping against the porch outside. The yellow light poured down onto the table, reflecting the silhouette of Darius sitting alone by the window, a leather notebook open in front of him. He twirled a pen in his hand, staring at the blank page for a long moment before he began to write. His hand handwriting was steady, each line clear. "You don't need to remember my name. Just remember that this should never happen again." It wasn't a statement seeking recognition or fame, but a message for anyone who would read it, reminding them that the gas station incident was not just a past story, but a warning to avoid repeating that mistake with anyone else. He put the pen down and sat silently for a few seconds, his eyes drifting to the window. The raindrops slid down the glass, merging with the dim light from the street, casting a thin layer of memory over the scene. Outside, people walked by casually, some with umbrellas, others in raincoats, their faces pensive or hurried. Life seemed unaffected by the media storm that had erupted around his story, and Darius knew that was the essence of time. It carried everything forward, but no one could guarantee that the lesson had truly been learned. He took a sip of coffee, the bitterness spreading on his tongue before it eased away, much like the feeling of recalling everything he had gone through. From the scorching afternoon smell of gasoline at the gas station, the tense glances, the words spat out one by one, to the moment the badge flashed and everything shifted. It all remained vivid in his mind, not in sequence, but like fragments of a movie that didn't need editing. He didn't see himself as the protagonist, just someone who happened to be in the right place at the right time, doing what anyone should have done. Inside the shop, a few customers whispered softly, the sound of spoons stirring and cups blending with the rain, creating a distant musical backdrop. Darius gently closed the notebook, slipped it into his coat pocket, and reclined in his chair. He continued to gaze out the window, where a young couple had just stopped by the porch to avoid the rain. The husband reached out to wipe a few drops of water from his wife's cheek, both of them smiling quietly at each other. That moment of peace made him think that perhaps that was the image worth protecting most, the calm and safety of those who don't have to fear when stepping outside. The rain continued to fall steadily, seemingly with no intention of stopping. Darius stood up, left the money for the coffee on the table, and walked out. The humid air immediately wrapped around him, but his steps remained slow, unhurried. He blended into the crowd unnoticed, and that was exactly what he wanted. He didn't need them to remember his face or know his name, just that what had happened would become a marker in the collective memory, so that whenever someone was about to repeat that mistake, someone would remember and stop. On the wet streets, the streetlights cast golden streaks that flickered with every raindrop. Darius walked through his shadow, merging with the crowd and slowly fading like a witness stepping out of the story, leaving it behind for those who would continue telling it. And somewhere, between the sound of rain and the ongoing rhythm of life, the words he had just written still echoed, not as a conclusion, but as a repeated reminder this should never happen again. Darius raised the coffee cup to his lips, taking a final sip, the bitterness gently blending with warmth that spread throughout his throat like a quiet punctuation to the long afternoon. He set the cup down, inhaling the remaining scent of coffee in the air, then gently closed the notebook, the soft creak of its leather spine creating a muted sound. As he packed his things, his gaze unexpectedly fell on a small piece of paper tucked among the stack of notes. The corner of the paper was slightly curled, but the handwriting was clear. One person is enough to keep what's right from being too late. He didn't remember when he wrote it, maybe during a quiet evening in another place or in some moment after a deep conversation. His fingers lightly traced the words as if wanting to feel their meaning once again. The simple phrase carried a weight he understood better than anyone. Throughout the ordeal at the gas station, he had witnessed many people standing up, each in their own way, from the person who filmed the video, the reporters, to the witnesses who decided to tell the truth. Each action had meaning, but sometimes all it takes is one person in the right place at the right time, willing to speak or do what's necessary to change the course of an entire story. He picked up the paper, examining it under the cafe's yellow light. Outside the window, the rain continued to fall steadily, the droplets reflecting the light from the signs across the street, creating shimmering streaks on the wet pavement. Darius smiled softly, not with joy, but with a quiet agreement to the meaning of the words he was holding. He knew that the world would never lack for wrongdoing, and not always would there be a crowd to fight against it, but what mattered most was that there would always be someone willing to be the first. The soft sound of a chair scraping from the next table pulled him from his thoughts. A young couple had just stood up to leave, leaving behind a thin veil of coffee smoke rising from their unfinished cup. Darius watched them step onto the porch, holding their umbrella together, their figures quickly blending into the crowd under the rain. He folded the paper, neatly placed it in the middle of the leather notebook, and tucked it into his coat pocket as if keeping a personal reminder. No need to show it off, no need to explain, because he believed anyone who read it at the right time would understand its meaning. He stood up, leaving a few small bills under the saucer where his coffee cup had been, then put on his coat and stepped out the door. The cold, misty rain immediately wrapped around him, but his pace didn't slow. The streets were still lit with fewer people passing by, but the flow was steady. In his sleeve, the notebook and the piece of paper rested quietly like part of the silent baggage he carried. With every step, he felt the words still echoing in his mind, not imposing, just reminding sometimes one person is enough, as long as they choose to stand on the right side. As he turned down a narrow street leading to the quiet neighborhood, he looked up and saw the rain had softened into tiny droplets, shimmering under the streetlights. Everything seemed to lighten, as if the city itself understood that a long day was drawn to a close. And, somewhere, the words, "One person is enough to keep what's right from being too late," stayed with him like a punctuation mark, not just for his own story, but for anyone willing to begin right where they stand. The story began on an ordinary afternoon at a small gas station where Darius Cole was just a truck driver stopping to refuel. But the moment Mark Halden appeared with his commanding gaze and overreaching actions at place became the center of a chain of events no one could have predicted. From a few tense words, everything quickly escalated into a direct confrontation, and then a small detail, the flash of the FBI badge and Darius's wallet, became the turning point. The video, captured by a passerby, opened the door for the world to witness the truth, and from there, the incident expanded beyond a personal clash, becoming a debate about civil rights, the responsibilities of law enforcement, and the value of evidence. The wave on social media exploded, carrying with it debates, supporting voices, and direct questions. From personal posts to detailed newspaper analyses, the story was dissected from multiple angles, raising questions about power culture and the suspect first prove later mindset that exists within some segments of law enforcement. The pressure from public opinion reached even the closed-door meetings, forcing officials to investigate, hold hearings, and issue formal charges. At the same time, small but steadfast actions from the community, like signing petitions and sharing information, demonstrated that justice doesn't only come from the courts but also from the persistence of those willing to speak out. The seemingly disjointed pieces began to fit together: the confession of a former officer, newly discovered evidence, the public's consensus set at memorial events, and the messages written on the board in the park. Darius wasn't seeking recognition. He played the role of a witness, but it was his calmness and principles in the most difficult moments that became an inspiration. He reminded everyone that change starts with the courage to admit mistakes and defend what's right, even if it's just one person standing up to do so. From this story, there are lessons that cannot be ignored. That justice does not exist on its own if no one defends it, and that power, no matter at what level, must be monitored and limited. That a small piece of evidence, a video, a truthful account, can be the line between truth and oblivion. And most importantly, that an ordinary individual can make a significant impact if they do not turn away when they witness injustice. Simple actions like asking someone's name before asking why, listening before judging, or staying calm before acting can change the outcome of a story. When the noise began to fade, what remained was was not just the investigation records or the verdict. What remained was the collective memory, a reminder that the wrongs that once occurred will happen again if we let our guard down. Darius Cole's story didn't end at the cafe or the park, but continues to live in conversations and school lessons and in each person's awareness of their responsibility to justice. Because sometimes, as the words he once wrote it, only takes one person to make sure what is right does not come too late.